Burgundy, Iris, or Moses Cleveland's Canterbury Tales, Book 10, line 29-25. Behind Ladandria emerged Feline, but Caddy with her bow alight had been, but focused on the shadow blights, the shadow people, left and right, the flame afore indeed, but panic brought. Too late before the troll could thus reply, it knocked and drawn and lit, the arrow spied, a flame and aimed right at its face, but craven whimpered in disgrace, as through its eye was pierced, the target sought, by hand of dread the other eye to lack, as Ganger crouched, but ready to attack. For 2 on foot the blinded troll would legs to lack and head to roll, would flame thus lent, 'twas Ganger's sword may bent, would fallen troll but forward to put to fire, anatomized and flaming for the pyre, it toasted, roasted, smoldering, discrete components, fire to bring, with charnel parcels to end for to be sent, with charnel parcels fed the abattoir, a flaming slaughterhouse by near and far, upon their mates the trolls to dine, what Ouroboros for to find, what festive carnage as their numbers dwindled. In festive carnage trolls indeed wallowed, in troll de jour all that they could swallow, a feast befitting of a king, no bread or loaves but for to bring, no arms to twist or diners for to swindle, no arms to twist for feasting to abide, coercion nay for feast by holler fried, ramped up but by the bucket, black-legged trapes unintelligent, like cliff-bound lemmings sense but cast aside, let darkness guide the way, what logic mourned for to commemorate, for anarchy but for to call, divisive filth but for to fall, with knee-jerk instincts but for to preside, but stupid, nay, not rightly so to be, untempered instincts, no filter to see, with knee-jerk reflex for to fall, thus lost the trolls in nescient pall, in darkness what refuge for they to call, spellbound thus in darkness for to keep, upon their mates to dine, what feast to reap, upon their mates to reap a toll, what instincts vile which drove the trolls, the weak before the strong, consumed by all, and nary for the carnage to subside, but by instincts vile the trolls for to abide, no compass for to chart their course, the weak consumed without remorse, nay sun or moon to view to guide the way, what blood moon for to hallow it be true, nay constellations through the mist to view, no guidance save the darkness bade from instincts, nay the trolls to save, what instincts primal, nay to keep at bay, what instincts primal for to run their course, with fight or flight indeed hard to divorce, headstrong thralls to eat their own, such ways the trolls indeed condone, though picky eaters not they dickering, though picky eaters not they dickered fierce, for spleen and livers corpses claws did pierce, what head cheese but to be troll brains, but sautéed in their skull by flames, which cracked like chestnuts, or open fire roasting by the score, what nut-brain trolls indeed for to adore, what cross to bear indeed to share, when flaming difficult to bear, what water nay but for the horse to drink, what backsheesh banal Janus did subscribe, what litter bearers want for to prescribe, what diving he thus did desire, with trolls but bearers of the pyre, but of that destiny but fate to wink, what Ballylakas played a haunting dirge, with tumbling tumblers harlequins to merge, not yielding in a tandem fray, in unmatched means colliding they, a slam dance in a mosh pit but to serve. Back in the moment Catania withdrew, but trolls to find in bubbling cauldron stew, the scent and sound of Black Lake found, north to discern and east be bound, the taste of water fresh upon the winds to observe. Together come? Nay, but they came apart. What spirit trolls but sundered in the dark? Blind indeed, nay, to assemble, hulks to lumber, to resemble, the troll fae to vacate their falling hosts. In ignorance their numbers for to dwindle, their numbers down in nay for to rekindle. What spirits nay for to abide, with hosts but corpses to reside, what wakeful spirits nay indeed to ghost. Into the fray brought Amber her pole arm, its height but right for trolls to better harm. A swing be tangled in the trees, but poked she trolls indeed with ease, though tardy she behind her be, a trail of flaming headless trolls to see. Like chicken though the flaming beacon stank, for flaming beacons Jenna for to thank, but for to make the same mistakes, a flaming exit trail to take, an exit strategy by firelit be. And Gruger always bringing up the rear, his brother Gangor, he for to endear. He packing heat to put to flame, to kindle trolls with but no shame, ligneous corpses to incinerate. What mudslingers into the pitch to delve, upon their mantles trophies but to shelve, their own fell hands to guide the way, towering muck but for to stay, indeed to sway, to bind and conflagrate. What towering walls of muck but for to mine, to sink within or build high by design, indeed to sway but for to stay, what muck to mind and keep at bay, but deeper than a grave to dig, to find, against the wall to throw but for to stick, but culinary not to fling such shit, for muck doth cling unto itself, thus muck on muck will always stick, but sinking though or higher for to climb. But sinking though or higher for to build, what house of muck but fuller to be filled, what house of muck but for to fall, collapse and smother, indeed all, yet for to fling what muck indeed to sling. Yeah, 7:15:26, I'll stop right there. I purposely avoided mentioning the Epstein files and all of this. I'm not going to say there wasn't that it wasn't part of the inspiration. It goes back to like 1995 or so when we started having, and I still largely can't talk about this, but what was happening is we started having like 14 and 15-year-old underage strippers showing up at clubs to work. I won't go into the details. I didn't hire them, but I did have to tell them to leave. It's kind of a long story, but there's other connections there with other things that were going on. Basically, though, what we're talking about here is systemic grooming and part of the systemic corruption. And what girls who, if you've been engaged in like minor trafficking, it's what you do with, the kind of skills that you acquire there, afterwards. And this goes back to before the days of Mueller and Kathleen Turman with FBI Victim Services. But, I know it applies to all sorts of different things, but when you're talking about, sex assault victims and victims of human trafficking, generally their out is to work in, the adult entertainment industry. And it's like I said, when you start getting, a whole bunch of girls who are underage, wanting to be strippers, there's generally a reason why for that, so it's kind of like, basically it's, in regards to like trolls and messy eaters and trails of breadcrumbs and things like that, that's what it comes down to. So it's kind of like, with the retribution agenda targeting the Epstein survivors, it doesn't just extend to the people who are known, but there's other people who were either recruited or, basically rejected, for some reason, because it's like I said, friends generally talk and things like that. But, in that regard, in regards to this, basically it's an illegal agenda that supported, minors working as strippers and things like that, or continuing on as like sex workers for some, because that's the kind of life that they were encouraged to engage in. It's, Well, it's like I said, it's things are different now. At least they were up until 2025. But with the whole thing with Robert Mueller and Kathleen Turman and starting victim services, I just want to make a point about that, because that's part of what assists with the recovery program. Because you can't be having 15-year-old girls shaking their butts at strip clubs. It's kind of illegal. Now, the way the law worked, at least in Ohio with this, is that it was legal for them to work as cocktail waitresses. And then there's but you had to be 21 to actually work as a nude dancer in an alcohol club. But if you worked actually it'd be a topless dancer, because you couldn't be nude in an alcohol club. But in a non-alcohol club that had nude dancing, you could be 18 and still work. So that's where the law is. But when you got a 14-year-old girl showing up to be a cocktail waitress, like I said, I won't go into that, but there was a big fight that night, and I'm not going to mention her name, but I'm pretty certain I know who she was, and so is the FBI. So it's like I said, it comes down to what sort of trends support, like what sort of illegal trends support, underage girls, or basically minors working in adult entertainment establishments, which is still illegal. So, and I've got to say that because it comes down to legal non-disclosure and process of investigation, and basically pinning down various assets, so that the investigators and prosecutors can pursue cases. And it comes down to like I said, there's systemic grooming and systemic corruption and all the stuff that encourages that sort of corruption. It's kind of like the budget cuts for assistance funding and government programs to help people to better themselves. And as I've said a couple of times on some of the congressional Facebook pages, sex workers are pretty much a necessity for a military dictatorship, because that's how they reward the troops generally. So that would include boys and girls. And it goes back to Uncle Willie's former association with Joseph Broz Tito, the former dictator of Yugoslavia. Because what Tito did was he lowered the age of adulthood to 12, so that kids could pretty much do everything that adults could do, including work as sex workers. And when you're talking about conquest and a military dictatorship, that's part of, and you hear this in some of the Mushroom Head tunes there coming out of Cleveland too. But that's more fuel for the fire. When you're talking about military dictatorships and conquest agendas. Because women are generally, unless you are valuable for a different purpose, the only use that they're going to see for women in a dictatorship is as sex workers, So I figured I'd point that out. And like I said, I've been avoiding talking about the Epstein files. But, this goes back to like 1995 and actually before. So the trend is actually there, and it comes down to a systemic corruption in the government and people who support the sex trafficking of minors for whatever reasons. So there's a lot going into that. Actually don't know Jenna Jones personally, but and I don't know if my late half-sister did, but there's motivation for her death and my niece's murder back in 2015. Like I said, it was an abdominal wound from a negative range shotgun blast, and she was 17. So I don't know if it's like I said, with the Epstein recruitment agenda, it pretty much encompassed all 50 states and Europe. So you've got international issues there too. That's where like Interpol checks in. And of the American federal agencies, you got DSS, that's basically embassy security. But there's the CIA and the FBI, which both maintain offices internationally. So, there's a lot going on with this. But like I said, all of which, the current administration tries to deny. And, hindsight's 20/20. And I also mentioned Oh, the paperweight murder that allegedly occurred back in New Jersey. That was basically someone's daughter. I guess she was like 13 or 14 years old. But it comes down to where Al Capone allegedly fit in with child trafficking, which was something that was largely not discussed, back 100 years ago. But apparently this girl was chrome-plated by the wet method in a acid bath, and then that's where the paperweight thing comes from. And some of that's attributed to urban myth, because I don't know if a corpse was ever found. So hope maybe she's in somebody's hidden bunker or in a junkyard somewhere, or just in a landfill. But that's something that was attributed to Al Capone when he still was in New Jersey. So you got all the child trafficking stuff going on there too, which is not what he was busted for. You had former Treasury agent Elliot Ness on that one. And, they basically got him for tax issues because they couldn't get him for the other stuff that he was, well, she wasn't chrome plated with Teflon, but, if you know anything about chrome plating, it's still pretty slick. But I figured I'd bring that up because, as far as I know, no evidence has ever been found other than like hearsay and information to support that alleged crime. But, so there's a lot of stuff going back, and it's, with the way the current administration lies, AG Bondi and acting AG Blanche and stuff, it's just an insult to, the intelligence and the integrity of a lot of people who have come before me. And I figured I'd make that statement. And again, I want to thank, Ro Khanna and Thomas Massey for passing the Epstein Files Disclosure Act. Because, when you're bound by legal non-disclosure for this, pending investigation, and just because it's not going on during the current administration doesn't mean that the investigation will not be picked up again, once the current administration is out. I just wanted to say that, with the statute of limitations on a lot of this, that's a big thing of what they're trying to, basically justifies the insurrection and sedition, because they want to overthrow the government to avoid being prosecuted, which is kind of like a new twist on the old Stalinism memes, because the Iron Curtain fell over Eastern Europe basically as a means for Stalin to avoid investigation and prosecution for alleged war crimes, which, it's pretty known that he did commit those, but it's basically, when you get into it, it comes down to basically an extrajudicial defense argument, so he's going to throw the Iron Curtain down and threaten everybody with nuclear war to avoid prosecution, which is similar to what, President Trump's been doing. But I will cut this off right there. Love you all. Have a good day, and thank you for listening.